Is the time. Now, look, I've been in this business for a long time, and it takes a lot for man's depravities to man to make me shocked. But reading some of the dispatches from journalists in and around the city of Bucha and other parts of Ukraine, sadly, it makes your jaw drop. If you can try and think of just about how brutal one group of people can treat another, you're pretty much there, I've told you. People having their hands bound and shot in the head or shot in the mouth. Rape being used as a form of subjugation, sometimes women in front of their children, and corpses being booby-trapped. Addressed quite rightly by President Zelensky yesterday. But what is the latest from the British government? Let's turn to Conservative MP and Secretary of State for Wales, Simon Hart, who joins me now. Thank you very much for coming on, Secretary of State. What do you imagine this will prompt within Number 10? Good morning.
Morning. I think it will prompt even more shock and horror than was the case before. I think we've heard of these things. I think looking at the papers this morning, look at the images this morning, are just a stark reminder, as if we needed one, of just how awful this is. This is a long way from being the end of this particular war, and I think it just reminds everybody in a global sense that we have to do more, and we have to do more quickly.
And what more might that be as regards the British government, Secretary of State?
I think there's a number of ways in which we have been able to help as far as hitherto. I think the financial support is one thing. I think the diplomatic support, and I know that sounds a slightly odd, perhaps an odd expression in the middle of a horror like this, but leading the rest of the world's response to this by way of sanctions, I think has been an incredibly, well, put it this way, President Zelensky himself has been very complimentary about the UK government's contribution to this. Also, the provision of weapons, defensive weapons, in the numbers that we've been able to provide. That's an ongoing and changing landscape, as everybody will understand, and we're very much in the hands of Ukraine, to some extent, looking at what how Putin is changing his particular tactics in order for us to respond to that. So, and I was saying somewhere else earlier on, this is not the moment to sit back and say, well, we've done enough. Now is actually the moment to try and accelerate and tighten and increase all of the things that we've been able to do to help Ukraine and to respond and to lead the international response.
There's a report this morning from Politico that your government is thinking of new sanctions against Russia this week. What might they be? And I appreciate you don't want to. I get you won't want to. But what might they be? When can we hear more, Secretary of State?
Well, I think, as is always the case in these very, very fast-moving moments, it's an ever-changing landscape. And I think we were able to introduce, I think it was something like 14 new sanctions last week. That brings the total to over 1,000 now. So that's quite significant progress. So I think that in all of the areas, this is going to sound a little bit evasive. Please forgive me if it does. Where we are able to provide sanctions is in any respect which restricts Putin's ability to function in the way that he wishes to. And those sanctions can be legal, they can be financial. There are a whole range of different areas in which they can, and they can be targeted as far as the oligarchy is concerned. For example, the impounding of super yachts and those very high-profile examples are just amongst them. But it's, as I said, what we have to be, I think, is very resolute. We have to recognise that over a period of time, sanctions can sometimes lose their potency, which is why instead, as I say, of saying, right, we've done 1,000, that's all we're going to do. Every day, every hour of every day, I know that Downing Street and the Foreign Office, the Ministry of Defence and others will be looking, right, what can we do today? What can we do to continue to lead the international response and to remind Vladimir Putin that this exercise that he's engaged in is doomed to failure.
You're right to say that President Zelensky has singled out Prime Minister Johnson for all the work he has done in bringing the world together, as it were, to make sure that there's a supply of kit and money. But there is a sense, I have to put you, Secretary of State, that as regards the Home Office, a lot more could be done regarding the issue of visas. There are, and I'm sure you'll wish to salute them, 200,000 families in the United Kingdom who've stepped forward with offers, homes, rooms, whatever it might be. And yet we understand the number of people who've actually got over the border is relatively slight, about 1,500. Why this snail-like progress, Secretary of State?
I know that is a perfectly reasonable question. I think in Wales, where we're working with Welsh Government on this, we've had an equally enthusiastic, incredibly generous and moving response from the public, want to help in every possible way. And inevitably, I mean, if we subscribe to the view that there do need to be rudimentary checks for everybody's safety, which I think we do, and I think most sensible people realise that that is not an unreasonable thing to do, then that is always going to pose some delays. And there will be different examples. I've got examples in my own constituency where this process has worked quite well. I've got some examples where it hasn't worked so well. The last thing in the world we want to do is look like a sort of bunch of Home Office officials standing around with clipboards saying, no, computer says no. That would be a failure.
But that is the look currently, Secretary of State, isn't it?
I think that's what some people are portraying the look as. We've now got up to 30,000 visas, or just under 30,000 visas having been granted. That's going at a rate of around 3,000 a day. For some, that will never be enough. And I think the images over the weekend, over the last 24 hours, will remind everybody involved in this, myself included, by the way, that we simply cannot allow bureaucracy to get in the way of what needs to be done to help people in this horrifying set of circumstances. And I just know, what I know about the way the Home Office functions is that it will be as struck by those images as the rest of us are, and redouble its efforts to make this process as smooth and stress-free as it's possible to do so.
I mean, this is the first time you and I have spoken about this, I will concede, but we have been hearing this for at least a couple of weeks now, Secretary of State, from some of your colleagues, and the situation doesn't seem to be expedited. Do you think the Home Office is fit for purpose in this instance?
Well, I know the short answer to that is yes, I do, and we have to recognise that this is not necessarily as straightforward as it. I don't want to make sort of mealy-mouthed statements. It's not necessarily as simple as it seems, and it's getting better. It is getting better with every day that passes. All I can tell you with absolute certainty is from the top to the bottom in the Home Office, the ambition is there, the willingness is there, the desire is there, the awareness of the horrors that this thing is throwing up are very imprinted on people's minds. So all I can say to you on behalf of colleagues, we absolutely recognise that we've got to move far and fast. As far fast as we can to make this the nation of sanctuary that we're rightly famous for.
Last couple of points. Your colleague Kwesi Kwarteng is, we understand, later this week to talk about a new policy as regards possible nuclear power or offshore power, wind turbines. I'm afraid I don't know how the good people of Wales react to the idea of wind turbines, or indeed whether there's a lot of them in the Principality. Your reaction to the idea of going nuclear and more wind?
Yeah, I think Wales is very enthusiastic about offshore wind. I think there's a huge amount of potential in the Celtic Sea. We're pushing that as hard as we can. At the moment, that's looking quite promising. I'm in the US later this week to try and move the whole concept of a large nuclear plant on Anglesey, another step closer, and a project we'd love to be launching with the Americans as soon as. And there's great enthusiasm, a transformational opportunity up there in North Wales for that a particular project. And I agree with, I think it was Grant Shapshister and others have been saying about onshore wind. I think that's much more controversial in Wales, but which is why I always rely on the fact that community consent when it comes to these things is absolutely crucial. And we've had some very difficult cases, particularly in the beautiful part of Mid Wales, where community consent wasn't on offer. And as a result, these schemes flounder. So offshore, great. Nuclear, great. The jury's still out on onshore wind.
Lastly, I doubt the jury's out on this one. A story that emerged on the weekend, Secretary of State. Children as young as 13 are being asked when they first had sex in a survey funded by the Welsh Labour government, raising fears, say campaigners, child abuse is being normalised. One question is, did you have sex 11 years old or younger when they first used a condom? Secretary of State.
I read that, and I have to say that my first reaction to it was this a spoof, because I didn't think it was any business of Welsh Government to be asking those kind of intrusive questions, and the fact that you've asked me the question makes me think that this isn't a spoof.
Sadly,
and
it seems to be true, Secretary of State.
Well, I'm not naturally somebody who wants to sort of politicise everything, but I do think it is another example of Welsh government's rather sort of bossy attitude to the citizens of Wales at the moment, where it considers it can intervene on any subject at any time, I find that as I say, I find that intrusive, and I'm not exactly sure what it seeks to achieve, and I think people are right to be sceptical about those, especially in the way it's being done, which sounds to me pretty clunky.
Would you have a word with Mark Drakeford about this then, as a result?
Well, absolutely, I would. They guard their devolved responsibilities fairly fiercely. They don't like interference, but I think it's perfectly legitimate if citizens of Wales come forward and say we're not very happy, come to me, which they do quite frequently on a whole range of stuff for which Mark Drakeford is responsible, and say, look, we don't like what's going on. Will you raise it with the First Minister? Yeah, I'm always very happy to do that.
Happy landings on your trip to the United States. Thanks for your time today. Secretary of State for Wales, Simon Hart, appearing here on LBC. We're the time 1 minute after 8. Let's get the next news.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, Moscow is facing the prospect of further sanctions over the reported killings of civilians in Ukraine.